Today is the day Donald Trump, the President of the United States, arrives for his two-day working visit to the UK and all of the political and diplomatic baggage that comes with that. It's Thursday the 12th of July 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the news. So let's start off with this story. It's a two-day visit. He arrives today at London Stansted, flies in, of course, on Air Force One. What is he doing? He's got a pretty packed agenda. He's meeting the Queen, meeting the Prime Minister, Theresa May, before heading off to his golf course for the weekend. He's also having a banquet at Blenheim Palace, which is, of course, the home of Winston Churchill, which is going to be attended by the Prime Minister, and over 150 business figures. That's important, of course, because one of the key components of the government's initiatives post-Brexit is for increased trade and possibly a free trade deal between the United States and the UK. Now, this all comes, of course, with what we've seen in the news recently with regards to protests. We've got a giant Trump baby, which is going to be suspended from, sort of floating from Palace Green in Westminster. And Theresa May herself is going to have to do this difficult balance of acknowledging that President Trump is unpopular in the UK as a whole, whilst at the same time achieving her national interest agenda, the diplomatic agenda of making sure that she is on side with President Trump, so to ensure that if there's any deals to be had in terms of further business with the US, it will happen under his watch. So Theresa May has been quoted as saying, this is a chance to boost the special relationship between the two countries, particularly, of course, not just trade, but also security links as well with the United States. Now, that also comes at the same time as we have continuous criticism of President Trump, continuous criticism particularly over what he's been saying regarding to NATO. We'll come on to that in just a sec. The Prime Minister also needs to seem in some way that she's assertive enough to take on President Trump when he says something wrong or does something wrong. So that in terms of the special relationship, it's not seen as simply the US ruling and the UK just simply being walked over. So very difficult balance for the Prime Minister today. Be interesting to see how she deals with this. This comes off, of course, of the back as President Trump has said that Britain is in chaos. At least reports have said that he said that, and that he'd quite like to see Boris Johnson during his trip. That was in the papers in the past few days as well. Something that probably won't be on the best, or be the best news for the Prime Minister to be reading after the former Foreign Secretary resigned over Brexit just a few days ago. Let's just have a look then at the next story, which is to do with NATO. Now, President Trump was at the NATO summit yesterday, and it was particularly stormy, as it was reported to be going to be. The president said that other NATO member states should double their NATO spending obligations to about 4% of their GDP. They should be spending at least 4% on defence. Now, one of his criticisms of NATO is that many of the member states are not spending even 2% and achieving the 2% obligation they have to achieve for NATO, for defence. And so saying doubling it really gives you a sense of just how significant his demands are. Singling out Germany as well in particular for criticism about its defence spending as well, something that will not go down well with Chancellor Angela Merkel. Now, currently only 5 of NATO's members actually reach the current 2% spending commitment. So the US is actually relied on very heavily in terms of the defence budget. It is a fair point, roughly, for President Trump to be making in terms of the actual facts and figures. But a 4% spending commitment for all member states, that would be a significant task for the President. The worry, of course, is that if there is no cooperation or there is no agreement made here, the concern is, particularly with President Trump's very assertive and very forceful way of doing things, he could see the US pull out of potentially the Article 50 obligation of NATO, which is to come into the defence of any of the NATO members who are attacked. But also, the worst case scenario, the US actually pull out of NATO altogether, seeing it as something which, again, is not a good deal for the US in a very much America first presidency. Very interesting stuff. No doubt this will come up today as well with the Prime Minister, Theresa May, when President Trump meets her on his working visit. Finally, one more story then. Brexit is still in the background, and actually it's quite a significant event today. We've heard and we've had the fallout of what happened in the Chequers summit, the agreement over the Brexit white paper about the future relationship between the UK and the EU, what the government are going to be pushing for in the negotiations. All we got in on Friday was the rough headlines of what roughly the government are going to be pushing for. Today we will see the white paper, which will be far more detailed and far more comprehensive in terms of outlining the government's position. Now, this has been looked forward to not only by many MPs and ministers, but also from Brussels as well, so they can have a look and get into the real substance of what the negotiating position is, and the real negotiations to some extent can start. Now, this is to do with the customs relationship, a common rule for goods, not services, so following EU regulations on goods, but diverging and doing something different on services with perhaps some kind of equivalence, so recognition of mutual regulations, all achieving roughly the same thing. And the idea as well of freedom of movement ending and the end of ECJ, European Court of Justice jurisdiction. There is a lot of detail, it's endlessly complex, but there should be something which will be able to give greater insight later on today. I would expect to see some reaction from Brussels, and I would also expect to see some reaction from the hardline Brexiters, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, people like Sir Bill Cash, people who've very much have been watching the Prime Minister closely with regards to a customs union, with regards to tariffs and regulatory alignment with the EU, all of these little nuanced things which they see as difficult to achieve a proper Brexit when doing. In terms of the Prime Minister, is she safe? Well, she is at the moment in the sense that she does have some degree of cabinet unity. This is totally pending, however, on what happens to this white paper and what the government's proposing and what the actual final deal we get with Brussels is. Remember that this white paper we're going to get out today is simply just the UK's negotiating position going into the talks with the EU. What comes out the other side after all the concessions have been made is a whole different matter, and if there are further concessions by the UK during the negotiations, what you might see is people like Michael Gove, Liam Fox, Andrea Leadsom, Chris Grayling, the Brexiters who remain in the cabinet might actually say, you know what, this is now going too far. Similarly, Theresa May currently has not had a vote of no confidence. She hasn't received those 48 letters handed into the 1922 Conservative Committee at the moment. But if it starts to see that more and more there is a Brexit concession going on in the negotiations, she might find herself very much in real trouble. And people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's obviously leads a very influential European research group, he's already said the position in of itself at the moment is not acceptable and is looking for some kind of significant change. So certainly for the Prime Minister, whilst President Trump, whilst NATO, whilst future trade relationships with the US is going to be her main focus in the next 24, 48 hours, there is something rumbling on in the background for her to be very much aware of in the next few days as well. That's pretty much it for today. You're up to date. Don't forget, you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics and have a conversation with us by following our YouTube pages, our Twitter and our Facebook right there. We'll be back again tomorrow around about 9 o'clock. Until then, see you later.